The crystal towers of Valoria Prime gleamed under their twin suns like jewels scattered across a peaceful world. For 3,000 years, the Valorians had lived in harmony with their planet and each other. Their cities grew like living things, shaped from the singing crystals that responded to thought and emotion. Children played in gardens where flowers changed colors based on their laughter. Artists created sculptures that danced in the wind. Scientists studied the stars with curiosity, not fear. Haniel pressed her delicate hand against the communication console, feeling the familiar hum of the crystal matrix beneath her palm. As communications officer for the Valoria Republic, she spent her days listening to the gentle chatter of trade ships and research vessels. Her species had evolved from peaceful herbivores, and violence was as foreign to them as breathing underwater. They had no weapons, no armies, no concept of war beyond ancient stories from other worlds. The first sign of trouble came as a shadow falling across the sky. Bora rushed into the communication center, her translucent skin flickering with the pale blue patterns that showed fear among her people. As chief science advisor, she rarely left her laboratory. Seeing her here, with those terrified markings pulsing along her arms, made Haniel's own skin begin to shift toward the same fearful hue. "They came through the jump gate 5 minutes ago," Bora said, her voice barely above a whisper. "Ships. Hundreds of them, nothing like we've ever seen before." Haniel turned to her screens and gasped. The orbital sensors showed massive vessels dropping out of hyperspace around their world. These were not the graceful exploration ships the Valorians knew. These were brutal, angular things covered in weapon ports and armor plating. Even from space, they radiated menace like heat from a fire. "Have they tried to communicate?" Haniel asked, though her trembling fingers were already reaching for the contact protocols. "They have," said a new voice from the doorway. Jiwan entered. The room, his usually calm demeanor cracked with stress. As military defense coordinator, his job had always been ceremonial. The Valorians had no enemies, no weapons, no need for defense. His entire department consisted of him and 2 assistants who mostly handled asteroid deflection systems. "What did they say?" Bora asked. Jiwan's skin pattern shifted to deep red, the color of absolute terror. "They said we have 12 hours to prepare for processing. They called us biological resources and genetic material for optimization. I don't think they see us as people at all." The first bombardment began 20 minutes later. Haniel watched in horror as beams of superheated plasma struck the crystal city of New Harmony. The singing towers that had taken centuries to grow shattered in seconds, their death song echoing across the communication networks like screams. The beautiful spirals and flowing curves of Valorian architecture crumbled under the assault, replaced by smoking craters and twisted metal. "The children," Bora whispered, staring at the destruction. "The schools. The nurseries. More ships descended from orbit, disgorging smaller craft that swept over the cities like mechanical insects. These carried ground forces, and Haniel caught glimpses of them through security cameras before the feeds went dark. The invaders were massive creatures, nearly twice the height of a Valorian, covered in thick armor and carrying weapons that could punch through crystal walls. They moved with practiced efficiency, herding civilians into groups and separating families. Jiwan worked frantically at his defense console, trying to activate what few protective systems Valoria Prime possessed. The asteroid deflectors fired, once before being destroyed. The emergency barriers around the capital lasted 47 seconds. Their most advanced defensive system, a gravity wave generator designed to redirect comets, managed to disable 2 enemy fighters before being reduced to molten slag. "It's not enough," Jiwan said, his voice breaking. "We have nothing. We've never needed anything. How were we supposed to know?" The communication channels filled with desperate voices. Emergency services overwhelmed. Hospitals reporting casualties they couldn't treat. Transport systems failing as refugees fled the cities only to find the enemy everywhere. Haniel tried to coordinate responses, but what could she do? The Valorians had no weapons, no soldiers, no way to fight back against an enemy. that saw them as nothing more than resources to be harvested. The enemy's purpose became clear as reports flooded in from across the planet. They weren't trying to conquer Valoria Prime, they were processing it. Entire populations were being loaded onto transport ships. Adults were separated from children. The weak and elderly were simply eliminated. The invaders moved with the cold efficiency of farmers harvesting crops. "We need help," Bora said, though her words sounded hollow in the communication center. "Someone has to help us." Haniel's fingers moved across her console, accessing the long-range communication array. The Valorians knew of other species, other civilizations scattered across the galaxy. They traded with some, shared research with others. Surely someone would respond to a call for help. "The Celestial Council," she said, remembering the stories. "They're supposed to keep peace in the galaxy. They help civilizations in distress. Do we have their communication codes?" Jiwan asked, hope flickering in his voice. Haniel searched through their databases. The Celestial Council was mentioned in dozens of reports from other species, always described as a force for peace and stability. But she found no direct contact information, no treaties, no formal relationships. The Valorians had always been too isolated, too focused on their own peaceful world to join galactic politics. "I'll send a general broadcast," she decided. "Someone will know how to reach them." Another wave of plasma fire lit up the sky outside their windows. The communication center shook as a nearby crystal spire collapsed, its harmonic frequency disrupted by damage. Emergency lighting flickered on as the main power grid failed in 3 cities simultaneously. Haniel began composing the message that would change everything. She included their coordinates, their population count, their complete lack of military capability. She described their peaceful society, their contributions to galactic art and science, their desire for nothing more than to live in harmony with their world. She attached video feeds showing the destruction, the families being torn apart, the systematic elimination of everything the Valorians had built over millennia. "To any who receive this message," she said into the recorder, her voice steady despite the chaos around her. "The Valorian Republic requests immediate assistance. We are a peaceful people facing extinction. Our world is being destroyed by forces we cannot resist. We have no weapons, no defenses, no way to protect ourselves. If the Celestial Council exists, if anyone can hear this, please help us. We are dying." She broadcast the message on every frequency, every channel, every communication method the Valorians possessed. The signal went out into space, carrying with it the desperate hope of 50 million souls. Outside, another city burned. The enemy. Ships continued their methodical processing of the planet's population. Children cried for parents who would never return. Ancient crystal formations that had sung for thousands of years fell silent forever. Haniel watched the signal strength. Indicators on her console, confirming that her message was propagating through space. Someone would receive it. Someone would come. The galaxy couldn't simply stand by and watch an entire civilization be erased, but deep in space, the message traveled through the void toward receivers that would change the fate of more than just Valoria Prime. The desperate call for help was about to reach ears that had never heard of the Celestial Council, never signed treaties of peace, never promised to save anyone. It was about to reach humanity. And humanity had very different ideas about how to respond to genocide. The coffee in Doyun's mug had gone cold hours ago, but he kept drinking it anyway. As station commander of Omega 7, humanity's most distant monitoring post, he was used to long shifts watching empty space. The station sat at the edge of the Sol system, a metal spiderweb of sensors and communication arrays designed to listen for anything that might threaten Earth. Most days, nothing happened. They tracked asteroids, monitored solar radiation, and occasionally picked up radio signals from alien civilizations light years away. It was important work, but rarely exciting. The most interesting thing that happened in an average week was when Taewoo found a new language pattern in some distant transmission. Today was different. Yoonji looked up from her communication console with wide eyes. As chief communications specialist, She handled all incoming signals, sorting the cosmic background noise from actual messages. Her screens showed hundreds of waveforms, frequency patterns, and data streams that most people would find meaningless. But Yunji could read them like words on a page. "Commander," she said, her voice tight with tension, "I'm getting something strange on the deep-range sensors. It's not natural background radiation." Do-Yun set down his coffee and walked over to her station. The screens showed a complex signal pattern unlike anything in their databases. It was clearly artificial, but the encoding was completely foreign. Whatever had sent this message wasn't human. "How far out?" he asked. "Based on signal strength and propagation patterns, I'd say about 47 light years. The signal is strong, which means whoever sent it used a lot of power." Taiwu appeared at Do-Yun's shoulder, already studying the data. As their xenolinguistics expert, he spent his time trying to decode alien languages and communication methods. His office was filled with translation matrices, pattern recognition software, and theoretical frameworks for understanding non-human thought processes. "This is definitely a distress signal," Taiwu said after a few minutes of analysis. "The repetition patterns, the power levels, the broad spectrum transmission. Someone is calling for help. Can you decode it?" Do-Yun asked. "Give me 20 minutes. While Taiwu worked on the translation, Minho ran the signal through their intelligence databases. As the station's intelligence analyst, he knew every alien civilization that humanity had detected, cataloged, or made contact with. His job was to assess threats and opportunities from the constant stream of data flowing through their sensors. "The source coordinates don't match any known species in our files," Minho reported. "This is coming from a star system we've never seen active before. No previous transmissions, no energy signatures, nothing." Do-Yun nodded grimly. First contact situations were always delicate, but distress calls complicated things enormously. Humanity had protocols for responding to alien civilizations, but those protocols assumed peaceful meetings under controlled conditions. If someone was in trouble, the normal rules might not apply. "Got it," Taiwu announced, his fingers flying over his keyboard. "The language structure is unlike anything I've seen before, but the mathematical foundations are clear. They're using prime number sequences for synchronization and basic geometric concepts for meaning." He transferred his preliminary translation to the main screen. The text was rough, clearly machine translated from something completely alien, but the meaning was unmistakable. "Emergency transmission. Valorian Republic requests immediate assistance. Population 50 million, no military capability. Under attack by unknown hostile forces, peaceful civilization facing extinction. Request help from Celestial Council, coordinates attached." The communication center fell silent. Do-Yun stared at the message, feeling the weight of 47 worlds crying out for help across the vast emptiness of space. 50 million people. An entire civilization with no way to defend itself. "Keep working on the translation," he told Taiwu. "I want to know everything about this message." Over the next hour, more details emerged. The aliens called themselves Valorians, and they had been peaceful for thousands of years. They had no weapons, no armies, no concept of warfare. Someone or something was systematically destroying their world, and they had reached out to an organization called the Celestial Council for help. "Do we have any information about this Celestial Council?" Do-Yun asked. Minho shook his head. "Nothing in our databases. Either they don't exist, or they operate in parts of the galaxy we haven't explored yet." Uyunji's screens flickered as new data streams came through. "Commander, I'm getting additional transmissions from the same source. Video data, technical specifications, population records. They're sending us everything they have." The video feeds were the worst part. Do-Yun watched crystal cities burning under plasma bombardment. He saw elegant spires that had stood for millennia crumbling into dust. The aliens themselves appeared on screen, tall and graceful with translucent skin that changed colors based on their emotions. Right now, those colors showed nothing but terror. The attackers were visible too, massive armored figures that moved through Valorian cities like demons from hell. They carried weapons that could punch through walls and wore armor that shrugged off everything the peaceful aliens could throw at them. But worse than the weapons was the systematic nature of their assault. This wasn't random violence. It was organized genocide. "They're processing the population," Minho said quietly, analyzing the tactical data. "Separating adults from children, eliminating the weak, loading the rest onto transport ships. This is a harvesting operation." Taewoo had gone pale as he worked through more of the transmissions. "They're calling for help from anyone who can hear them. They've sent technical data about their attackers, population centers, defensive capabilities. They're completely open about their weaknesses because they have no choice." Do-yeon made a decision that would echo across the galaxy. "Yoongi, send a response." "Sir?" she asked, surprised. "We don't have authorization for first contact protocols." "This isn't first contact. This is a humanitarian crisis." He moved to the communication console and began composing a message. "Tell them help is coming. Tell them to hold on as long as they can." "Commander," Minho said carefully, "we don't have the authority to commit Earth's military to an alien war." "No," Do-yeon agreed. "But I have the authority to forward this message to people who do." He opened a priority channel to Earth Command and began uploading everything they had received. The video feeds, the technical data, the desperate pleas for help from a dying civilization. He included his own analysis and recommendation, immediate military response. The reply came back faster than he had expected. Admiral Soo-young herself appeared on the screen, her expression grim as she reviewed the data in real time. "Confirm the authenticity of this transmission," she said without preamble. "Confirmed, Admiral. The signal characteristics, language patterns, and technical specifications are all consistent. This is genuine. And you believe they have no military capability?" "None whatsoever. They're completely defenseless." Admiral Soo-young was quiet for a long moment, studying the video feeds of burning cities and terrified civilians. When she spoke again, her voice carried the weight of command decision. "Very well, Commander. Maintain communication with the aliens. Tell them the cavalry is coming." The connection ended, leaving Do-yeon and his team alone with the continuing stream of desperate transmissions from Valoria Prime. On the screens, the destruction continued. Cities fell. Populations were processed. An ancient civilization died by degrees while they watched helplessly from 47 light-years away. But somewhere in the Sol system, humanity was stirring. Ships were being fueled, weapons loaded, marines assembled. The response to the Valorian distress call would be unlike anything the galaxy had ever seen. The aliens had called for the Celestial Council, an organization that might not even exist. Instead, they were about to discover what happened when you sent an SOS to the wrong species entirely. They were about to meet humanity. Admiral Soo-young stood in the war room of Earth Command, watching as the largest military mobilization in human history unfolded on the screens around her. Every display showed ships launching, troops assembling, and weapons being loaded with mechanical precision. The response to the Valorian distress call had triggered protocols that most people hoped would never be used. 40-8 hours. That was all the time it had taken to assemble a fleet that could glass planets or save civilizations, depending on who was asking. "Final count, Admiral," reported General Hyunwoo as he entered the war room. The Marine Expeditionary Force leader looked exactly like what he was, a man who had spent 30 years preparing for the worst possible scenarios. His weathered face showed no emotion as he delivered numbers that would terrify any alien intelligence analyst. 847 ships across all classes. 2.3 million Marines distributed across 47 assault units. Full orbital support capability, including 12 dreadnoughts and 36 heavy cruisers. We can level continents or perform precision rescues. Your choice, Admiral. Soo-young nodded grimly. The fleet composition told a story about humanity that she wasn't entirely comfortable with. Every ship in their armada had been designed for one purpose: destroying other ships. Every Marine had trained for one mission: killing enemies and breaking things. Even their medical ships carried enough firepower to fight off entire fleets. What about the xenobiology team? She asked. Dr. Nari looked up from her tablet, surrounded by screens showing alien physiology data. As the leading expert in xenobiology, she had been working non-stop since the distress call arrived, trying to understand what they were dealing with. The Valorians are incredibly fragile by our standards, she reported, her voice filled with concern. Hollow bones, delicate skin, sensitivity to loud noises and bright lights. Their atmospheric requirements are close to ours, but they need lower gravity and reduced oxygen levels. Most importantly, their psychology appears completely nonviolent. They literally cannot comprehend warfare. What does that mean for rescue? Operations? General Hyangwoo asked. It means our standard procedures will probably kill them, Dr. Nari said bluntly. Our medical equipment is designed for human physiology. Our combat stims would poison them. Even our emergency rations might be toxic. We're going to have to completely rethink how we approach this. Commander Jinwoo stepped forward from where he had been studying tactical displays. The leader of humanity's most elite Special Forces unit had been analyzing the enemy forces seen in the Valorian transmissions. The attackers are calling themselves the Korthic Empire, he reported. Based on the video feeds, they're about twice the size of an average human, heavily armored and equipped with energy weapons. Their ships use plasma-based weaponry and rely on energy shields for defense. Assessment? Admiral Suyang asked. Primitive, Jinwoo said without hesitation. Their tactics are designed for fighting defenseless populations, not military forces. They rely on overwhelming firepower against targets that can't fight back. Against prepared resistance, they'll fold quickly. The confidence in his voice was absolute, backed by decades of studying warfare in all its forms. Human military doctrine had evolved through countless conflicts, producing soldiers and tactics that assumed the enemy would be just as deadly, just as determined, just as willing to die as they were. Fleet deployment status? Suyang asked. 90% ready for hyperspace jump, reported Captain Kyungmin from the diplomatic corps. The remaining ships will follow within 6 hours. But Admiral, we need to discuss the political implications of this operation. Suyang turned to face him. Captain Kyungmin had spent his career trying to establish peaceful relations with alien civilizations. The idea of humanity's first major contact with galactic civilization being a military intervention made him deeply uncomfortable. The galaxy doesn't know we exist as a military power, he continued. Our previous contacts have been limited to research vessels and trade missions. When we arrive with nearly 1,000 warships, we're going to change how every alien civilization views humanity forever. Good, General Hyunwoo said firmly. Maybe they'll think twice before committing genocide if they know someone might actually respond. The screens around them continued to show the mobilization. In orbit around Earth, ships the size of cities prepared for war. The newest dreadnought, Indomitable, stretched over 2 kilometers and carried enough firepower to sterilize continents. Its escort of heavy cruisers could each punch through planetary shields. The destroyer squadrons moved like schools of mechanical sharks, fast and lethal. The logistics are staggering, reported Chief Soo-min from his engineering station. We're moving the equivalent of a small nation across 47 light-years. Food, ammunition, medical supplies, spare parts, fuel for 2 million people for an indefinite period. Plus specialized equipment for alien contact protocols we're making up as we go. Dr. Nari pulled up more analysis on her screens. I've been studying the enemy's apparent harvesting procedures. They're not just killing the Valorians. They're processing them for something. Genetic material, biological resources, maybe slave labor. This isn't random violence. It's systematic exploitation. Which makes it worse, Admiral Suyang said quietly. Random violence can be stopped with superior firepower. Systematic exploitation requires complete elimination of the perpetrators. The final launch clearances came through as the last ships finished loading. The armada that humanity had assembled represented the culmination of centuries of military development. Every weapon system had been tested in combat. Every tactical doctrine had been proven in blood. Every ship had been built with one assumption, that somewhere out there, something would try to destroy humanity, and humanity needed to be ready to destroy it first. "Signal from the monitoring station," reported the communications officer. "They're still receiving transmissions from Valoria Prime. The situation is deteriorating rapidly." The main screen switched to show intercepted alien communications. Even through the rough translation, the desperation was clear. Valorian cities were falling. One by one, the population counts kept dropping. Children were being separated from families. The systematic processing of an entire civilization continued while the galaxy watched in silence. Estimated travel time. Su Yang asked. 14 days at maximum hyperspace velocity, Chief Sungmin replied. "We'll arrive with full fuel and ammunition reserves. 14 days. In 14 days, there might be no Valorians left to save?" The mathematics of genocide were simple and brutal. The Korthic Empire had the advantage of time, position, and ruthless efficiency, but they had never faced humanity. "All ships report ready for hyperspace jump," came the announcement across the fleet communication system. Admiral So Young looked around the war room one final time. The screens showed nearly 1,000 ships arranged in formation, their crews ready for whatever they might find at the end of their journey. 2 million Marines checked their weapons and prepared for combat. Against an enemy they had never seen, to save people they had never met, because someone had asked for help and no one else had answered. "Signal the fleet," she ordered. "All ships, hyperspace jump in 30 seconds. Destination, Valoria Prime. Mission parameters, eliminate hostile forces, protect civilian populations, and show the galaxy what happens when you send an SOS to the wrong species." The ships vanished into hyperspace, leaving Earth's orbit empty except for the defense platforms and patrol vessels that would guard humanity's home while its children went to war. In 14 days, the galaxy would learn that there were worse things than genocide. There was humanity's response to genocide. The hyperspace journey to Valoria Prime took 14 days, but the galaxy learned about humanity's response within hours. Space was not empty, and hyperspace trails were not invisible to those who knew how to look for them. Captain Kyungmin sat in his diplomatic office aboard the flagship, watching his screens fill with panicked communications from across known space. As the fleet's chief diplomatic officer, his job was supposed to be establishing peaceful contact with alien civilizations. Instead, he found himself trying to explain why nearly 1,000 human warships were racing toward a system most species had never heard of. "Transmission from the Altarian Trade Consortium," reported Lieutenant Sunho from the communications station. "They're demanding to know our intentions and threatening to close all trade routes if we don't respond." "Tell them we're responding to a distress call," Kyungmin replied, though he knew it wouldn't satisfy them. The Altarians were merchants who had built their empire on careful neutrality. The idea of anyone mobilizing this much military force for humanitarian reasons was completely outside their understanding. "Sir, we're also getting signals from something called the Galactic Safety Commission. They want us to turn back immediately and submit to inspection protocols." Kyungmin rubbed his temples. Every hour brought new communications from alien governments, trade organizations, and military alliances he had never heard of. Apparently, humanity's isolation had kept them from learning about dozens of major galactic powers. "What about the Celestial Council?" he asked. "Have we heard anything from them?" "Yes, sir. Finally got a response an hour ago." Sunho transferred the message to the main screen. "They acknowledge our communication and state that the Valoria Prime situation is under careful consideration by the appropriate committees. They expect to have a preliminary response within 6 to 8 weeks. 6 to 8 weeks, Kyungmin repeated in disbelief. "The entire Valorian civilization will be extinct by then." Major Yuri looked up from her workstation where she had been analyzing intercepted enemy communications. As the fleet's psychological operations specialist, her job was understanding how their enemies thought and fought. What she had discovered made her increasingly worried. "Captain, I need to show you something," she said, transferring data to the main screen. "I've been monitoring Korthik military communications, and they know we're coming." The intercepted messages appeared on screen, rough translations flowing past as Yuri explained their significance. The Korthik Empire had an extensive intelligence network, and humanity's massive fleet movement had not gone unnoticed. "They're calling us the Deathworld species," she continued. "Apparently they have files on us. Not detailed files, but enough to know that we're dangerous." "How is that possible?" Kelman asked. "We've barely had any contact with galactic civilization." "According to these communications, there are stories about us, legends, really. Most species think we're myths, but the Korthiks believe we're real. They describe us as the species that turns planets into weapons and the ones who fight their own star." Kim Min stared at the translations. Humanity had indeed fought wars in space, including battles near the sun during the asteroid mining conflicts. Apparently someone had been watching. "What's their response to our approach?" he asked. Major Yuri's expression darkened. "They've accelerated their timeline. Instead of processing the Valorian population over several months, they're trying to finish within the next week. They want to complete their harvesting operation and evacuate before we arrive." The implications hit Kenman like a physical blow. The Korthaks were speeding up their genocide because they were afraid of humanity. Millions of Valorians were going to die because the enemy was trying to avoid a fight. "We need to go faster," he said. "We're already at maximum hyperspace velocity." Chief Su-min reported from his engineering station. "Push the drives any harder and we risk catastrophic failures. Half the fleet would be stranded in hyperspace." More communications flooded in as word of the human armada spread across the galaxy. The Regelian Defense Force offered to mediate between humanity and the Korthik Empire. The Centauri Republic warned that large-scale military actions required approval from the Galactic Stability Council. 3 different species offered to purchase intelligence about human military capabilities. "They're treating this like a business transaction," Lieutenant Sunho observed as he processed the incoming messages. "Nobody seems to care that an entire civilization is being destroyed." "They care," Kyungmin corrected grimly. "They just care more about stability and profit than they do about stopping genocide." The most disturbing communication came from something called the War Crimes Tribunal of the Outer Rim. They sent a formal notice that humanity was in violation of the Galactic Intervention Accords, which apparently prohibited military action in sovereign space without proper authorization. "They're more concerned about our paperwork than about 50 million people being murdered," Major Yuri said after reading the full message. "According to this, we were supposed to file a formal intervention request with 17 different organizations before taking action. How long does that process take?" Kingmin asked, though he suspected he already knew the answer. "Minimum of 4 months. Average processing time is 2 years. The absurdity of galactic bureaucracy was staggering by the time humanity's intervention request worked its way through the proper channels. The Valorians would be extinct, their world strip-mined, and the Korthak Empire would have moved on to other targets. "Sir, priority message from the monitoring station," Sunho announced. "They're still receiving transmissions from Valoria Prime." A main screen switched to show the latest intelligence from the doomed world. The situation had deteriorated even further. Entire continents were now under Korthak control. The processing facilities were working around the clock, sorting Valorian civilians into categories: useful genetic material, suitable for labor or immediate disposal. The video feeds showed children being loaded onto transport ships while their parents were led away in different directions. Valorian scholars and artists were being executed en masse, their knowledge apparently considered worthless by the invaders. The crystal cities that had taken millennia to grow were being demolished, and their materials shipped off-world. "Population estimate?" Kyungmin asked, though he dreaded the answer. Down to 12 million from the original 50 million, Major Yuri reported. At current rates, they'll be extinct within 6 days. The human fleet was still 8 days away. New communication, Sunho announced. This one's different. It's from something called the Hegemony of Advanced Species. The message that appeared on screen was formal and threatening. The hegemony apparently considered itself the true authority in this region of space, and they were not pleased with humanity's unilateral military action. They're demanding we withdraw immediately, Kelman read aloud. If we don't comply, they'll consider us a hostile invasion force and respond accordingly. What kind of response capability do they have? Major Yuri asked. Chief Sumin pulled up what little intelligence they had on galactic military forces. Unknown. Most species seem to rely on negotiation and economic pressure rather than direct military action. The largest fleet we've detected belongs to the Korthik Empire, and they're the ones we're going to fight anyway. More messages continued to arrive as the human fleet raced through hyperspace. Trade consortiums threatened economic sanctions. Peace organizations demanded immediate mediation. Military analysts offered to sell information about human weaknesses to the highest bidder. Through it all, the transmissions from Valoria Prime continued. Each update brought news of more cities fallen, more populations processed, more of an ancient civilization disappearing forever while the galaxy watched and filed paperwork. Captain, Lieutenant Sunho said quietly, we're receiving a direct challenge from the Korthik fleet. They're offering to negotiate the withdrawal of both forces from Valoria Prime. Kyungmin read the message and felt his blood turn cold. The Korthaks were offering to stop their genocide in exchange for humanity backing down. It sounded reasonable until you read the fine print. They wanted to keep everything they had already taken. They want to negotiate over 38 million corpses, he said finally. The galaxy was about to learn that some species didn't negotiate. The human fleet dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of the Valoria system, and Admiral Suyang felt her heart sink at what the sensors revealed. Valoria Prime was dying. What had once been a jewel of crystal cities and singing towers was now a burning wasteland covered in smoke and ash. Fleet status report, she ordered, forcing her voice to remain steady. All 847 ships accounted for, reported her tactical officer. Combat formations established. Enemy fleet detected at 7 million kilometers and... Closing, the main screen showed the Korthik Armada spread across space like a plague of metal insects. Over 2,000 ships of various sizes surrounded Valoria Prime, some in orbit processing the remaining population, others forming defensive lines against the approaching humans. My God, whispered Commander Daewon from his fighter squadron. Coordination station, look at the size of their fleet. The Korthik ships were massive, each one bristling with weapon ports and covered in thick armor plating. Their largest vessels dwarfed even humanity's dreadnoughts. By any measure of size and numbers, the human fleet was completely outmatched. Analysis of enemy capabilities? Admiral Suyang asked. Energy shields on all major vessels, reported the intelligence officer. Primary weapons appear to be plasma-based. Long-range sensors detect gravitational field manipulators, probably for asteroid mining and planetary bombardment. Weaknesses? Unknown, Admiral. These are ship designs we've never encountered before. On the planet's surface, Colonel Hound prepared her ground forces for what might be the most difficult mission in human military history. The Marine Ground Operations leader had trained for urban warfare, jungle fighting, and desert combat. She had never trained for rescuing fragile aliens while simultaneously fighting enemies twice her size. Preliminary scans of the surface, she reported to the Admiral. The Korthiks have established processing centers in 17 major population areas. Best estimate is 8 million Valorians still alive, but that number is dropping fast. The video feeds from the planet showed the true horror of what they faced. Massive Korthik processing facilities worked like industrial slaughterhouses, sorting Valorian civilians with mechanical efficiency. Children were separated from parents. The elderly and sick were simply eliminated. The rest were loaded onto transport ships for destinations unknown. Range to enemy fleet? Admiral Suyang asked. 5 million kilometers in closing. They're not running, Admiral. They're forming battle lines. The Korthek response was swift and professional. Their ships moved into defensive formations with practiced precision. Energy shields came online, glowing like soap bubbles around the dark hulls. Weapon systems charged with the distinctive whine of plasma generators building power. They know how to fight, observed Commander Daewon. This isn't going to be easy. Signal from the enemy flagship, reported the communications officer. They're demanding we withdraw from their operational area immediately. Response? Asked the tactical officer. Admiral Suyang looked at the screens showing Valorian cities burning and processing centers working overtime to eliminate the remaining population. 8 million people were still alive down there, but for how much longer? Open a channel to all human ships, she ordered. Battle stations, weapons free. Show them what happens when you genocide the wrong species' neighbors. The space battle began with humanity's signature tactic, violence so swift and overwhelming that the enemy had no time to adapt. The human fleet had been designed around one simple principle: destroy the enemy before they could destroy you. The first wave of kinetic missiles hit the Korthek shields like hammers against glass. The alien energy barriers flared and sparked under impacts they were never designed to withstand. Human weapons didn't rely on exotic energy fields or gravitational manipulation. They used simple physics, accelerate mass to incredible velocity, and let momentum do the rest. Shields failing on multiple enemy vessels, reported the tactical officer with satisfaction. Their defensive systems can't handle solid projectile impacts. The Korthek return fire was impressive but ineffective. Plasma beams that could melt through crystalline cities barely scorched human armor plating. Energy weapons that had terrorized peaceful civilizations for centuries met their match. In ships designed to fight other ships designed to kill. Nuclear detonation detected, announced the sensor operator. The Indomitable just put a fusion warhead through the enemy flagship's shield grid. Admiral Suyang watched as the massive Korthek command ship broke apart in a chain of secondary explosions. Around it, other enemy vessels tried to retreat but found themselves trapped between human battle groups that moved with coordinated precision. Enemy fleet breaking formation, reported Commander Daewon as his fighter squadron swept through the chaos. They're not used to fighting someone who shoots back. The space battle was over in 47 minutes. The Korthek Empire's mighty armada, terror of a dozen star systems, scattered before humanity's assault like leaves in a hurricane. Some ships escaped into hyperspace, others surrendered. Most simply ceased to exist, reduced to expanding clouds of superheated gas and twisted metal, but the real challenge began when Colonel Hyun's Marines landed on Valoria Prime. First wave touching down at Processing Center 7, she reported from her command drop pod. Heavy resistance expected. The Korthek ground forces were everything the intelligence reports had suggested. Massive, heavily armed, and utterly ruthless. They stood nearly 3 meters tall in their powered armor and carried weapons that could punch through building walls. Against defenseless Valorians, they had been unstoppable. Against human Marines, they lasted 6 minutes. Target eliminated, reported Sergeant Youngji as her squad finished clearing a processing facility. 23 enemy Kiar, no human casualties. But we have a problem with the civilians. The problem was immediately obvious to anyone who saw the rescued Valorians. The aliens were so fragile that normal human interaction could seriously injure them. Their hollow bones broke under the slightest pressure. Their translucent skin tore. Like tissue paper, even the sound of human weapons firing could damage their sensitive hearing. Medical protocols are completely inadequate, Dr. Nari reported from the field hospital she was trying to establish. Our emergency medical procedures are designed for human physiology. Standard CPR would crush their ribcage. Emergency stimulants would poison them. Even our food rations contain elements that are toxic to their biology. Colonel Hound found herself commanding an army that had to completely relearn how to provide aid. Marines who could fight in any environment struggled to pick up Valorian children without hurting them. Medics trained to treat combat wounds had to figure out how to help beings whose entire body could be damaged by a firm handshake. Processing Center 12 secured, came another report. Enemy forces eliminated. Civilian casualties ... significant. Was the terrible mathematics of the rescue operation? Every minute they spent fighting the Cortex was another minute the processing centers continued their grim work. Every delay meant more Valorian deaths, but rushing in without proper preparation meant accidentally killing the people they were trying to save. Final count from the surface operations, Colonel Hound reported hours later. All Corthac ground. Forces eliminated, all processing centers destroyed. Civilian survivors. She paused, and Admiral Suyoung knew the number would be devastating. 200,000 Valorians rescued. Approximately 7.8 million confirmed dead. The silence on the command bridge was absolute. They had won a complete military victory against an enemy that outgunned them 2-1. They had crossed 47 light-years to save people they had never met. They had risked everything to stop a genocide, and they had arrived too late to save 96% of the population. Signal from the planet, reported the communications officer. The surviving Valorians want to thank us. Admiral Suyoung looked at the tactical displays showing the wreckage of the Corthic fleet scattered across space, then at the surface readings. Showing a world littered with the evidence of systematic murder, humanity had won the battle. But the war against genocide was just beginning. 3 months after the Battle of Valoria Prime, Ambassador Minji stood before the Galactic Assembly for the first time in human history. The massive chamber held representatives from over 300 species, all gathered to address what they called the human problem. She looked out at the sea of alien faces, some curious, others fearful, many openly hostile. The humans had committed the ultimate sin in galactic politics. They had acted without permission and succeeded where others had failed. The chair recognizes the representative from the Terran Republic, announced the Assembly President, a tall being with silver skin and 4 arms who spoke in carefully neutral tones. Minji stepped forward, her simple diplomatic uniform a stark contrast to the elaborate robes and ceremonial armor worn by other ambassadors. Behind her, holographic displays showed the rebuilt cities of Valoria Prime, crystal spires rising again from the ashes of genocide. Honored delegates, she began, her voice carrying clearly through the chamber's translation systems. 3 months ago, my species received a distress call from a dying civilization. We responded because no one else would. We arrived to find 50 million people reduced to 200,000 survivors. We stayed to help them rebuild because someone had to. Murmurs rippled through the assembly. The Altarian trade representative shifted uncomfortably in his seat. The Centauri diplomat whispered urgently to his aide. Everyone knew the numbers, but hearing them spoken aloud made the scale of the tragedy impossible to ignore. The Celestial Council has finally arrived at Valoria Prime. Minji continued, with 50 ships and a peacekeeping mandate that came 4 months too late. They found human engineering teams rebuilding cities, human medical units treating survivors, and human agricultural specialists helping to restore food production to a world that had been strip-mined. The Celestial Council's representative stood up, his blue robes rustling with indignation. The human response violated 17 different articles of galactic law. Military intervention requires proper authorization through established channels. Your established channels, Minji replied calmly, would have taken 6 months to approve emergency aid for a genocide that lasted 6 weeks. While you were filing paperwork, an entire civilization died. Engineer Wanho worked 12-hour shifts on the surface of Valoria Prime, overseeing the reconstruction that was transforming the devastated world. His teams had a problem that no human engineer had ever faced before. Everything they built was too strong. Human construction standards assumed that buildings might need to survive earthquakes, hurricanes, meteor impacts, or enemy bombardment. Valorian architecture had been designed for beauty and harmony with nature. The crystal growing techniques that had created their original cities were lost with most of their population. "The new residential complex is finished," reported his assistant, pulling up holographic blueprints. "But the Valorians are complaining that the walls are too thick and the support beams are too heavy. They say it feels like living inside a fortress." Wanho looked at the specifications and sighed. By Valorian standards, they were building fortresses. The lightweight materials humans used for civilian construction were military-grade, armor compared to what the aliens were used to. Even their most delicate architectural details were built to withstand forces that would have destroyed the original crystal cities. "What about the hospital complex?" he asked. "Same problem. The medical equipment is too robust, the rooms are too well shielded, and the emergency generators could power a small city. Dr. Nari says the Valorians are intimidated by facilities that could continue operating through a nuclear war." It was the same story across the planet. Human refugee camps were built like permanent settlements that could house populations for decades. Human farms used soil enhancement techniques that would feed millions. Human communication networks were designed to function even if 90% of the infrastructure was destroyed. Everything humans built assumed that disaster was just around the corner, because in human history it usually was. Back in the Galactic Assembly, the debate had grown heated. The Regelian Defense Force accused humanity of destabilizing the region. The War Crimes Tribunal demanded that human forces withdraw immediately. The hegemony of advanced species threatened economic sanctions. "You created a precedent," argued the Korthic Empire's surviving diplomatic representative speaking from a heavily guarded booth. "Other species will expect military intervention in every conflict. The balance of power has been disrupted." Minji turned to face the Korthic diplomat directly. "You're right, we did create a precedent. The precedent is that genocide has consequences, that peaceful civilizations are not defenseless, that someone will come when you call for help." "But who authorized you to make that decision?" demanded the Assembly President. "What gives humanity the right to act as galactic police?" "The same thing that gave you the right to do nothing while 50 million people died," Minji replied. "Absolutely nothing. The difference is that we chose to act." Anyway, the chamber erupted in angry voices. Representatives shouted in dozens of languages while translation systems struggled to keep up. Some demanded humanity be censured, others that human ships be expelled from galactic space. A few quiet voices suggested that maybe the humans had a point. Admiral Suyang remained in orbit around Valoria Prime with a reduced fleet, watching the political chaos unfold through secure communications. The human military presence had been scaled back to 300 ships, but even that was enough to make every government in the region nervous. "Intelligence reports from across the galaxy," reported her tactical officer. "The hegemony is mobilizing a fleet to restore order to the region. The Celestial Council is demanding we submit to inspection and regulation. 3 different species are offering to mediate our withdrawal." "And the Korthic Empire?" she asked. "Officially, they're protesting our presence through diplomatic channels. Unofficially, they've suspended all expansion operations and recalled half their fleets to defensive positions." "They're scared, Admiral." Good, she thought. Fear was a better deterrent than diplomacy when dealing with species that viewed genocide as acceptable policy. "Message from Earth Command," her communications officer announced. "President Jiho is making an address to the galaxy." The transmission came through on all frequencies, broadcast to every world that could receive it. President Jiho appeared on screens across hundreds of star systems, speaking from the rebuilt capital of Valoria Prime with crystal spires rising behind him. "To the civilizations of the galaxy," he began, "humanity extends an offer of friendship and cooperation. We have established the Emergency Response Coalition, a voluntary organization of species committed to preventing genocide and protecting the innocent. Membership requires only one thing. When someone calls for help, you answer." The response was immediate and surprising. Within hours, 17 species had requested membership information. Small civilizations that had lived in fear of larger neighbors suddenly saw hope. Peaceful traders who had watched genocide from the sidelines found their voices. Ha and Eul stood in the rebuilt communication center of New Harmony, monitoring the flood of messages coming from across the galaxy. As one of the few surviving Valorian communications specialists, she had become the unofficial liaison between her people and their human protectors. "Another distress call," she reported to the human coordination team. "The Zephyrian Republic? They're under attack by something called the Harvester Collective." The human response was immediate. Ships that had been preparing to return to Earth changed course towards Zephyrian space. Marines who had been looking forward to rest and recovery began loading ammunition instead. "Tell them help is coming," ordered the human commander. 6 months after the Battle of Valoria Prime, the galaxy had learned several important lessons. Bureaucracy was no substitute for action. Neutrality was not the same as peace. And sometimes, the most dangerous species in the galaxy were also the most reliable friends. The Korthek Empire and others like them had discovered that predators faced consequences when humanity was watching. Peaceful civilizations had learned that they were not as defenseless as they thought, and everyone had learned that when you sent an SOS to the wrong species, sometimes you got exactly the right response. The age of human indifference to galactic affairs was over. The age of human responsibility had begun.